So this is a perfect segue to our next session. The title of this session is Epidemiology and Global Trends in Sugar Consumption. Barry Popkin's name has already been mentioned several times, so he needs no introduction. Barry is distinguished professor in nutrition at UNC Chapel Hill. He has done enormous amount of work in obesity, global obesity prevention and policies. So today he's going to talk about global sugar intake patterns and policies. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank, and thanks, Kelly, all for undeserved. I am one of these kind of I'm an economist and a nutrition epidemiologist, so I kind of cross both worlds, and if I can master this, and clearly, and I'm one of the people that Kelly talks about where his framework of going through strategic science, it's very much what my career now is, where we work providing science for advocacy groups, and we work with researchers in countries around the world and with governments to design an array of different policies. Tax is just one and may not even be the most effective, as I'll discuss as we move forward. I'll talk very briefly about some of the underlying drivers. Not much here because that's not what this day is about, except the next two sessions will really get into some critical issues that we're facing right now. I'll talk somewhat about global patterns, not using the most perfect of data, but giving you a sense of trends and relationships across the globe, and then I'll talk about some of the policy actions across the globe. I wish I could give you more data, particularly from a very broad-based set of programs in Chile, but the government has asked us not to release our results yet. So I can only talk in broad terms, but I'll give you some of the other ways that we're doing impact through focus group and a whole array of different things, not just kind of standard purchasing or what have you. The key things on this slide right here to talk about are sweet preferences. We all know we have sweet preferences. We all know we needed berries and other kind of vitamins and minerals through the thousands of years of evolution to survive. We needed them to complement a diet that was fairly carbohydrate, fat, protein rich, and the difference is we didn't expect what's happened in the last 50, 80 years with the revolution of sugary, caffeinated kind of beverages that have kind of taken over the world through every niche and cranny across the globe. And secondly, we have Rick Mattis here. He and Barbara Wells taught us really in the last only 30 to 35 years that what we drink does not truly affect what we eat, and that when we drink something with calories, it doesn't necessarily affect the calories from what we eat. In fact, it barely affects it, so there's almost no compensation, and that's been really critical, because when we went from water, which is something we need to survive with. If you don't drink water for 3 to 7 days, you're dead. But you can go without food for months, and we did, through seasonality of food availability across the globe for really tens, hundreds of thousands of years as we move through to the human species we are today. And so we needed to keep drinking, and the drinking couldn't affect the food because the food was very, very seldom, and we needed to drink as well as eat at those times. And for whatever reason, we find that our thirst and hunger mechanisms are really very separate. And that's where I'll stop there. This is kind of how the world has shifted in just a matter of decades across. You can't go to a village in Africa, Asia, Latin America. You can't go to the top of any mountain, the bottom in any jungle, and not find sugary foods and beverages. We might call them junk food. My Brazilian colleague, Carlos Monteros, might call them ultra-processed food. But whatever they are, they're very unhealthy, high in added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, and truly not healthy foods. And this is what happened in beverages. Really, the beverage revolution is a 50 to 75-year-old revolution. It took Coke from when their first factories were built in the 1916-18 period to really a century, 80 years to get in every village in the world. It took Red Bull 5 years to get in every village in the world. It now takes a new beverage developed in Japan, one of the major testing grounds, weeks, and you can find it in every village in the world if it's a good one. So communications change is really going on. And the amount of added sugar in our diet we're beginning to understand is really quite substantial. And it has many properties and many ways they use sugar, particularly in food beyond just the taste property, which leads to a lot of complexity. What I'm going to show you in the next slide is taking off of all the ingredients, and not only the ingredients, but we have the ingredients of the sub-ingredients for what's now about 1.6 million food products between 2000 and 2018 in our U.S. food supply. So we have a lot of different foods with a lot of different barcodes, and every ingredient has around 16 sub-ingredients. Many of those sometimes are not labeled as sugars on the label, but there's sugars in them, and we went through all of those, and this is just to show you what you believe and see from N. Haynes is not what reality is. So we took, looking at 2 periods of time, what N. Haynes showed as the beverage supply. And you'll notice they show a lot of sugary beverages, and then they show diet beverages, and with low-calorie sweeteners or high-caloric sweeteners. But you'll notice that when we took the ingredients from the foods themselves, from the foods that the average U.S. household purchased, from random samples of 100,000 a year of household and what they purchase every day, and you go through those ingredients, 15% at the point contained both diet sweeteners and sugary beverages. And that's the complexity of our food supply. It changes so quickly, our food composition table can never keep up with it, in no way. And this is, if you think it's true here, you can imagine what we find in other countries where the food composition table rarely changes. But at any rate, the issue is when we look at the U.S. foods and we look at the U.S. beverages, this is a slice from an earlier paper that we published on this topic, that you'll notice that about 70% of the foods and 70% of the beverages are red, yellow, black on the top, the colors. And those colors have either diet sweeteners, the non-caloric sweeteners, or they have sugar, or they have a combination. And a reasonable number in the food area particularly are beginning to have fruit juice concentrate. You'll find that particularly in all your organic foods because people think it's healthy if it says orange juice or lemon juice or lime juice concentrate, but it's just another sugar. And as is most juices that we drink in America, they're sugar and flavoring and water combined in one form or another. But the reality is up there is to see how much of our diet, how much of the foods in our country have some kind of caloric or diet sweetener. And most of the foods do. It's easier to get it out of the beverages than the food, because for the food they also have certain filling and other characteristics that are harder to replace by the industry than they can do for beverages, where they now have many, many different kinds of sweetener options. The next thing to think about and to realize is that most of our food is highly processed that Americans are purchasing. About a third of our food that we buy is ready to eat, or something from out there in the McDonald's, the fast food, the slow fast, or the sit-down restaurant world. Some of that's real food, some of that's processed. This is what we get from the package from the grocery store. And from the grocery store, 2/3 of 60% of what Americans get is very highly processed. But more interesting is this slide. Look here. This is the ready-to-eat, the proportion of what Americans buy at the grocery store that is ready to eat. And you can see the definitions of ready to eat on the right. The American teenager diet, if you saw it with the grain-based desserts as the dominant item and the rest of the foods and beverages and the sugary beverages and so on, you'd be kind of shocked at what the American children eat today. And then you go into the ready-to-heat category, and there's not a lot of cooking going on. Many of us here probably cook and we eat real food, but that is not America. And you have to realize we're facing a very different diet, and the diet that we're eating is becoming the global diet very, very fast. And I'm not going to go into that, but it's a serious issue. So I wanted to give you a little bit of that background to let you understand what the globe is eating. And what we're eating, a lot of countries in low and middle income are eating. They're eating a slightly less extent. So Mexico may get 58% of the calories from packaged food with barcodes and so on. China, when we did a survey study there in 8 years ago, it was only 23%, but it was growing 50% a year at that point in retail sales, and it's probably up to 50, 60%. Most of Asia, urban Africa, Latin America are between 30 and 60% of what they buy is packaged processed food today. And the world is really changing to follow the American approach to eating, and it's not just because Walmart, which is one of the major sellers, it's because of the huge revolution in global sales. But now let's come back to sugar. One of the critical things here, and this is for the US, and I'll show it for Mexico in a second, is that across all the age, gender groups, there's a huge maldistribution and consumption of sugary beverages. Sugary beverages, if we went back to 2000, were 2/3 of the calories from sugar in our US diet. Today, they're less than half. They're 46 to 48%, partly because high-educated, middle-educated whites and upper-educated blacks have cut their sugary beverage consumption. Nobody else has cut it, certainly not Hispanics, certainly not middle and lower-income blacks and whites. And so essentially, but we have a maldistribution. We have 60% consuming 300 calories or more from sugary beverage, added sugar in our diet, and we have a 20% really high up there. Now let me show you Mexico. Each of these bars are 20% of the population in that age group, nationally representative data. So you see, and you see the peak. Actually, the peak consumption period in the US was actually around 2002 and 3, when we look at the food purchase data. And then we shifted upper educated to diet beverages, and then because of the blogosphere, we shifted to water. So we've been going down overall since then, and everybody's been going down, but it's been led by upper educated, upper income whites and upper educated blacks, not by changes by anyone else. Then we go to Mexico. Mexico also saw some reductions, but in general, when you look at Mexico's consumption across different groups, this is on the right side, the 90th percentile, the top 10%. Then the next is the top 25%, and then the median in the darkest color on the third bar. And in each case, you can see that the top 25 to 40% really are the high consumers. Now, the tax in Mexico, in a paper we'll have coming out, will show that the tax affected the high consumers the most, which is really very good. They're the ones most likely to get hit by diabetes and so on and so forth. So it's not a bad thing. But consumption is skewed. We have a large proportion of non-consumers of sugary beverages in our country and across the globe. And when we study this area, we have to understand the non-consumers versus the others. Just briefly to give you a sense of the global picture, up here you can see North America, US and Canada clearly lead the world in sugary beverage consumption per capita. These data are not, their trends are correct. The levels are below what actually is purchased because these are just from the major brands. They miss all the small brands, a whole lot of sales of different in vending and other kinds of things. So this is really an imperfect picture, but the trends pick up quite accurately what's happening in countries when we compare them with food purchase kinds of trends. So what you see here is that North America leads the way, that Latin America is very high, and Latin America was really dominated by Mexico, Chile, Argentina, and then Peru and a few of the other Andean countries, and then lower down was Brazil and a couple other big countries. In the case of Mexico, I'll show in a second, once a big campaign started there about taxation, consumption did go down some. And you can see the trends in North America led by the US and Canada. It is US and Canada, and essentially the trends are just what we understand from U.S. Hanes data and other kind of diet data, and from all sugar availability data in the country. So you